Immigration Minister Chris Evans is in our Parliament House studio. Minister, good morning.
Morning, Fran.
Minister, the government's going to change the Citizenship Act so Olympic hopefuls can qualify faster for Australian citizenship, and you're halving the eligibility period from 4 years to 2. Isn't this just a blatant grab for gold?
No, it's not, Fran. I think that's a real misrepresentation. There's been a focus on a particular skater, but what we found is when the previous government changed the Act in 2007, it lifted the requirement from 2 years to 4 years of permanent residency. And there's been a whole group of people, as a result of the changes of rules, who haven't been able to get a pathway to citizenship. These include elite sports people who travel overseas. The tennis players are the classic example. Because they're out of the country more than 90 days a year, they actually can't ever become Australian citizens. One of the women's married to an Australian, is resident in Melbourne, but she can't actually get Australian citizenship. So this is about fixing up some of the anomalies that occurred as a result of those changes. One of them is directed at elite sportsmen, but the other set of changes are actually directed at people like airline pilots, scientists, oil rig workers, who just can't get citizenship because of the way the rules are constructed now. So it's driven in part by the needs of elite sports people, but it's actually just addressing some problems we found from those changes in 2007.
Okay, so the rest of the population, they only need 2 years or not 4 years?
No, they still need the 4 years, but as I say, we've tried to find...
Well, why does everyone else have to have 4 years and not an elite athlete?
Well, as I said to you, the main change relates to residence time in Australia. Currently, if you're out of the country for more than 90 days, you can't become a citizen.
Sure, but if you just address that and left it at 4 years, would that be in line with the rest of the community?
Well, part of the problem is we had to address a couple of other things to fix it. But the other subset issue, and it's a smaller issue, is this question of someone who is an Olympic athlete, that when we lifted it from 4 years to 2 years, from 2 years to 4 years, it effectively meant that anyone moving to Australia would not be able to compete at the next Olympics. And that doesn't seem to be a sensible proposition when people have got short sporting careers.
But the fact is we're making a separate category for sports people. I mean, that's the long and the short of it, right?
Well, one of the things
they can compete at the highest level.
Well, no, they've got to meet all the other qualifications, but we've changed the residency requirement to try and allow them to qualify for citizenship. That's right, but they've still got to be here as permanent residents. They've still got to have passed the citizenship test. But we are trying to address another anomaly, which is this question about people being ruled out of the Olympics because the 4 year requirement actually means they miss a whole cycle of the Olympic Games. But the major change is directed at this 90-day rule, which effectively bars people who work outside Australia for long periods from being Australian citizens. And I've had approaches from members of Parliament and others about airline pilots, scientists working in the Antarctic. There are a whole group of people who these changes will advantage.
This request for this legislative change came from the Australian Olympic Committee, didn't it?
I've been approached by the Australian Olympic Committee, by Tennis Australia, and as I say, we've had a range of individual cases from other permanent residents who just weren't unable to find a pathway to citizenship.
What message does this send to the rest of the world when, a growing number of refugees are crying out to come to Australia and we're just smoothing the way for sports people?
Well, it makes no difference at all, as you'd know, Fran. It doesn't impact on them at all. What we're saying is we have people who have committed to Australia, who are permanent residents to Australia, who are representing Australia at international events, who can't become citizens under the current rules. And my view is if the people have committed to Australia, want to make their life here, we ought to try and find pathways so they can become citizens. Currently, it says to a professional tennis player who's married and living in Australia, you can't become a citizen until you retire. That just seems to me to be ludicrous.
Let's go to the broader migration program, and Cabinet has agreed to adopt a more strategic long-term approach. But there have been some changes in the figures, fairly marked changes, and unions, I notice, are concerned about the level of skilled migrants being hunted by business, particularly by large construction companies working on the stimulus projects. They say these companies should be employing the thousands of Australians laid off in the construction industry over the past year, not importing workers. Can you make that happen, or are you interested in making that happen?
Well, we've always said that we put Australians' job opportunities first, and what we've seen, despite some of the claims today, is that the 457 visa scheme, the temporary visa scheme, has seen a sharp reduction in numbers. Numbers are down 40-odd% over the same time in the previous year, And in the construction areas, demand for overseas labour has virtually fallen away altogether. So some of the sort of claims made are not supported by the facts. The reality is the 457 scheme follows the economy, if you like. When the economy was booming, they were looking to bring in extra overseas labour. We've made it very clear that Australians get the first opportunities at jobs. We've made a range of legislative changes to make sure there's better protection. We've got the Worker Protection Act coming in the middle of September. We've ensured that overseas workers get the same rates as Australians so that there's no advantage in employing people from overseas. But if the economy picks up and there are skills we need that we can't get locally, obviously we'll facilitate that because that will help create jobs here as well.
Sorry, Minister, there does seem to be one group that is really experiencing a boom, and that's the temporary migrants. A dramatic increase of 11% in 1 year, if I read the figures correctly. 657,000 people over the last year, mostly foreign students and also working holiday makers. So these are groups that are here anyway. This is only going to keep rising, isn't it? Because education is a massive export, an important export for Australia. We're keen to get more foreign students.
Look, we are. I mean, this is really about having a more sophisticated debate about the migration program. I keep making the point that when I announced the annual figure for permanent migration, which is 108,000 this year, that's not the totality of the picture of our migration program. It's right, there's more than 500,000 people in this country who have work rights at any one time. That's been the case for many years now. We've seen a boom in...
and it's the case if Australians go on holiday somewhere else.
That's right. Up until recently, we had 70 or 80,000 plus Australians working overseas for what they described as permanently or for long term. Some of them have come back, particularly when the British economy started hitting the skids a bit earlier than ours did. But we're in a global economy now. People move. Journalists, doctors, accountants work overseas. A lot of Australians working in Asia. It's just a much more complex picture. And we've got a lot of people in this country who are here temporarily as students, as working holiday makers or temporary workers. And I'm just trying to make the point it's a much more complex picture, it's a much more complex labour market, and we've got to be able to plan for this and understand it much better than we do.
Chris Evans, thanks very much for your time.
My pleasure.
Chris Evans is the Federal Immigration Minister.